Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel as I continue my breakdown of Wind and Truth, the 5th book from the Stormlight Archives. In this video, I want to talk about epigraphs, and specifically 4 of the epigraphs that we saw all the way back in Way of Kings, 2 of which I think were fulfilled in Wind and Truth, and 2 of which I think that the events of Wind and Truth have actually shed new light on, including potentially to suggest that Taravangian's reign or rule over Roshar will be short-lived. But if it isn't already clear, this video will include spoilers for all of the Stormlight Archive up through the end of Wind and Truth, and depending on what we get to, it may also include spoilers for Mistborn. So with that, let's get into it. I want to start by doing a quick recap of what the epigraphs in Way of Kings are and why they're important. And specifically, many of the epigraphs in Way of Kings are death rattles, which are essentially like visions of the future that are experienced by people on Roshar right before they die. And they are influenced by Molak, who is one of the Unmade. So the epigraphs, many of those death rattles are basically predicting what's going to come, which is why I think it's kind of cool to see them come full circle in Wind and Truth. So the first epigraph I want to talk about is from chapter 53 of Way of Kings. And specifically it says, "He must pick it up, the fallen title, the tower, the crown, and the spear." And this one I thought was really satisfying in Wind and Truth because to me it was pretty clearly referring to Kaladin becoming a herald and picking up Jezreel's title as the king of the heralds. So to break down why, the first point is that the chapter where in Wind and Truth where Kaladin becomes a herald is literally titled "The Tower, the Crown, and the Spear." And over the course of the chapter, we see many references to the Tower, the Crown, and the Spear as he kind of ascends to this role. For example, at one point in the chapter, Kaladin pulls out a cloak that's emblazoned with the tower and the crown. And the cloak was the one that Dalinar had given Kaladin when he first joined his army. And then Dalinar references when he asks Kaladin to become essentially his heir to Urithiru. The other point there is that when Kaladin says the words of the 5th ideal, the honor spear, essentially, an honor spear falls and it forms in his hand, what's known and described in the book as a tall silvery spear. And so to me, this was like very nicely foreshadowed in Way of Kings, and it's really nice in my mind to see it fulfilled at the end of Wind and Truth. The second epigraph here is from chapter 57 of the Way of Kings. And what it says is, "I hold a suckling child in my hands, a knife at his throat, and know that all who live wish me to let the blade slip, spill its blood upon the ground over my hands, and with it gain us further breath to draw." Now this one I know is like speculated on a lot heading into Wind and Truth, and I think the outcome was largely predicted by the fan base, specifically that, and Wind and Truth ends up making it clear that the suckling child refers to Gavinor, and the death rattle I think is referring to Dalinar's prediction when Odium chooses and nurtures Gavinor, to become his champion in the Contest of Champions. This kind of shows, and this death rattle talks about how Dalinar was essentially forced into kind of an impossible situation, having to choose between killing his brother's grandson in order to win against Odium. And so when the death rattle speaks of gaining further breath, I think to me it references how if Dalinar had decided to go ahead and kill Gavinor, he would have secured Alethkar and incidentally her dad's future from Odium. And I just want to say, I know it was controversial for Gavinor to be the suckling child in this death rattle, but overall, I think the way that it played out kind of worked for me. I really like Dalinar's arc, and I think his choice not to kill the sucking child, not to kill Gavinor, really helped seal his redemption arc. And I have a whole video that I'll link to in the description below that walks through what essentially Dalinar chose to do and why it mattered at the end of Wind and Truth. Now I want to get to some of the epigraphs that I think Wind and Truth, that didn't come true in Wind and Truth, but instead I feel like the book really shifted the paradigm and how to think about these death rattles. And so my third epigraph is from all the way back from chapter 4 of Way of Kings, which says, "A man stood on a cliffside and watched his homeland fall into dust. The waters surged beneath, so far beneath, and he heard a child crying. They were his own tears." Now, heading into Wind and Truth, I would have said that this death rattle probably refers to the fall of Kholinar. And that's because it kind of mirrors this idea of like a kingdom falling into dust, kind of mirrors Dalinar's visions about Kholinar crumbling into dust. But I think what Wind and Truth may have suggested is actually that this refers to Kharbrandt, and the man watching Kharbrandt fall is Taravangian himself. And there are a couple of reasons why. The first is that the chapter in which this epigraph is placed in Way of Kings is titled City of Bells, which is a reference to Kharbrandt. And the chapter itself is about Shallan discovering Kharbrandt for the first time. And I think I don't want to overlook chapter titles in general. I think there are often Easter eggs suggesting where an epigraph may go. And so that's, I think, a key one. The second point is that in Wind and Truth, we learn that when Odium destroys Kharbrandt to kind of like make a point to cultivation, Taravangian ends up, when she looks away, saving its inhabitants and recreating Kharbrandt in the spiritual realm, including then the inhabitants being his daughter and his grandchildren. And Taravangian's hope, we learn, is that the city will persist in the spiritual realm and essentially be insulated or isolated from the destruction that Odium is going to bring essentially upon the Cosmere. And so what I think this kind of new look at this epigraph is showing us with that information is that potentially that this effort to save Kharbrandt will fail, and Taravangian, despite his best efforts, will watch his homeland fall. And I know this sounds weird because Taravangian was holding the Shard of Odium when he destroyed Kharbrandt, but I think it shows that Taravangian was able to retain kind of a kernel of himself over the course of the book. This idea that Taravangian Odium will fail in some way is kind of the lens through which I approach the fourth and the last epigraph as well, which is from chapter 11 of Way of Kings, which says, "3 of the 16 ruled, but now the broken one reigns." And at face value, this is kind of clear in that the 3 of the 16 almost certainly refers to the 3 of the 16 shards, honor, cultivation, and odium that ruled over Roshar. And then the broken one almost like seems like it refers to retribution, who by the end of the book, by the end of Wind and Truth, reigns over Roshar. But I think it's not quite so simple. I'm not convinced that the broken one is a reference to retribution or Taravangian. In fact, over the course of Wind and Truth, Taravangian is actually more routinely referred to as the divided one, kind of referring to the dueling nature of his reason and his tendency to plan versus kind of the emotion and the passion of his shard. And I don't think being the broken one necessarily captures that. In fact, Kaladin and the Radiants are more commonly referred to as broken, not Taravangian. So I think what this epigraph could actually instead suggest is that someone else who more neatly fits this criteria of the broken one designation ends up reigning over Roshar, and that Taravangian, or as the holder of odium and retribution right now, as the divided one's reign is more short-lived. And I think that fits in my mind with the previous epigraph as well, that suggests, as I said, that Taravangian will watch the fall of his homeland. So what do you think? Do you have the same reading or takeaways that I have from these epigraphs? Or are there things that you feel like I've missed? Or have you noticed other epigraphs or death rattles that came through in Wind and Truth? And if so, please put them in the comments below. And if you like content like this, please like the video, please subscribe. I continue to post regularly on all things Cosmere. Thanks, everyone.